They are icons of comedy and an American institution. Three characters that are part of the very fabric of popular culture.
I ought to know. One of them was my father.
Hello. 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 Just how do you grapple with the fact that the apple never falls far from the tree? Well, it landed with a clunk, slap, plop. When it came to me, my source of frustration was my dad's occupation. He's a stooge. Oh no, egad! Hey Moe! Hey Moe! Hey Moe! Hey Moe! Hey Dad! I always hope to be an ordinary Joe, a face in the crowd, John Doe. But just my luck, I'm born son of Moe. I never nyuk for my father, and it wouldn't be Moe if I had my brothers. And oh, by the way, take a look at his brothers. Hey Moe, hey Moe, hey Moe, hey Moe, hey Dad. Was blinking, something got me to thinking how my dad was always for real. It hit me with a bonk, boom, crash, is what it took to get me to feel. Well, now I ain't hiding and I'm swelling with pride, along for the ride and glad. So here's the Three Stooges story in all his knucklehead glory. It ain't just a passing fad. Hey Moe, hey Larry, hey Uncle Curly, Uncle Shemp, hey Joe and Curly Joe. Hey Moe, hey Moe, hey Dad, Kerplop.
Now, when we last left my father, Moe Howard, he was roaming the stages of vaudeville, playing the Stooge with brother Shemp Howard, Buddy Larry Fine, and straight man boss Ted Healy. She was Helen Schoenberger, and she was, in a bit of theatrical irony, a cousin of the legendary Harry Houdini. My mother and dad had met 3 years earlier, in 1922, on a Brooklyn beach, when my dad and Ted Healy were serenading all the girls with a variety of popular tunes.
And they were singing and playing together, and my mother happened to be there with, I think, one of her sisters.
Aunt Lil.
Aunt Lil, right.
When he would strum his ukulele on the beach for her, she was just fascinated. I really think that's what got her to first really be charmed by him.
And Mother charmed Dad, and I understand it was her shapely legs at first that did the trick.
It was love at first sight, even if those fantastic legs made my mother quite a sight in her old-fashioned bathing suit.
She had on these high silk hose that they wore with bathing suits. She were really covered up, but the only problem was the dye in the hose started to run all over her
Right.
legs.
But it didn't darken the relationship one bit.
That blossoming relationship, in fact, brought out an unexpected side of Moe's personality. This may come as a shock to you, but my father, that mean and murderizing Stooge, composed passionate love letters and lyrical love poems while he and Helen were courting. But even a make-believe half-wit needs a better half. And in 1925, Moe married the love of his life, the girl who was his soulmate, and the woman who would one day become my mother. And Moe, hoping to provide a stable home for his new bride, quit the act and attempted to go straight. Then in 1927, my dear, dear sister Joni was born. Now Moe was both a husband and a father, and he took his responsibilities very seriously. He needed a job, a business, anything to make a decent life for his wife and child. And so he tried all sorts of things, from retail to real estate, encouraged and underwritten by my grandmother. But all his efforts failed, driving him close to bankruptcy.
My grandmother was in the real estate business, and she did extremely well at it until the Depression came along. And my dad was really proud of her, and I can remember one scene in a home movie where, because she was a very, I was sort of a little afraid of her because she was rather stern looking. She rarely ever smiled. And I remember on film, my dad trying to get her to laugh or smile, and his head was tucked in under her chin, and he was pinching her cheek, trying to get her to laugh. And it was like just the edge of a little tiny bit of laughter. It was difficult to get it out of her. He understood her.
Sure, he understood her, but that wasn't helping Dad's would-be new career. Perhaps there was something else going on with my dad's inability to make the straight life work. Maybe his heart really wasn't in it as much as he loved my mother and my sister. And maybe his mind was where it had always been, dreaming about that next showbiz job. And so Moe, now desperate for cash and still eager for fame, looked up at a theater marquee and imagined his name on it, even if it meant unbearable absences from the women he loved.
They were separated in the early years because my dad would go off on his vaudeville tours, and my mom, to take care of me, would stay home. Although she wasn't happy about that, I don't ever remember her complaining. Whatever he wanted, she wanted to be able to please him.
Just nestled where the roses bloom, just Molly and me.
Should he stick to his plan of trying to be a traditional 9-to-5 husband? Or should he follow his show business dreams, as unreliable as those dreams might be? His mind insisted that he pursue the former, but his heart told him that he would never be happy if he didn't give the latter a try. And so it was only a matter of time before he was back playing the Stooge with Shemp and Larry and sharing the stage with the increasingly unpredictable Ted Healy. So what was Healy's problem? If you want to know, just read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, except that his magic formula came in a bottle labeled 80 proof. That's to say that when Healy was sober, he could be charming, generous, and friendly, a prince of a fellow. But when he was drunk, he became a monster, vicious, vindictive, acid-tongued, and physically intimidating. Shemp and Larry resented his behavior with a passion. My dad saw his faults too, but remembering his old childhood pal Lee Nash probably was more forgiving than he should have been. But business was business, and so the act was reunited in 1929 for the Schubert Broadway Revue, A Night in Venice, directed by the soon-to-be famous Busby Berkeley. The show was a huge hit, and the critics loved it, especially the segments featuring those three loony guys playing opposite Ted Healy. But A Night in Venice closed after only 175 performances because another show, one playing about 100 blocks south of Theater Row, had just laid a titanic egg. That comedy was called Wall Street. Yes, the stock market had crashed, ruining the lives of rich and poor alike, and the Great Depression was about to change America forever, including how Americans tried to amuse themselves and escape the misery of being poor. Movies had been gaining fans by the truckloads over the previous 10 years, becoming the most popular form of mass entertainment and the punchline to that old theater joke, "Who killed vaudeville?" Additionally, the first experiments with sound films, beginning with 1927's The Jazz Singer, had become a full-blown revolution.
My heartstrings are tangled around Alabama.
Movie companies needed musical and comedy acts to populate their new talking pictures. And now, after the crash, still flush with cash from the wildly successful 20s, the studios sent scouts to scour the country in search of new faces. And it was one such scout from Fox Pictures who saw Healy and the Stooges perform at the Palace Theater in New York. He was impressed and immediately offered them a chance to star in what they used to call a major motion picture.
The Stooges came through what I think is a must. You must start on a stage. You must learn how it works. You know, you have to hone your art. You have to know what you're doing. So suddenly, you are told that there are 1 million people in this camera. And so while you can't hear them laughing, you know that they are because you're that good. You're way ahead of the game. You're way ahead of the game when you can do that.
Hollywood was calling, and once that call was answered, things were never going to be the same. Because if the stage had made the Stooges successful, then celluloid would, over the next 20 years, make them immortal. But immortality would have to wait.
The first trip we made to California to do a picture was we did one for Fox, Soup to Nuts, written by Rube Goldberg, the cartoonist.
Yes, that Rube Goldberg, the guy with the crazy machines. Healy and the boys made the now little-remembered Soup to Nuts.
We're on our way to Hollywood!
With the Stooges playing multiple parts. The film wasn't exactly a box office smash, but Moe, Larry, and Shemp made a big impression on their bosses, far bigger, in fact, than Healy did.
It's a great night, a great night. I told my Stooges they're gonna get along fine in Hollywood.
Fox liked them so much that they drew up a 7-year contract, but the trio hadn't reckoned on Healy, a partner from hell.
You welch on me now, I'll see to it you never work again, you hear me?
He went crazy, threatening the studio with legal action. Healy had always signed all the contracts and then had paid his sidekicks out of his own cut. When my father, my uncle, and Larry discovered that Ted's backstabbing had ruined a golden opportunity, they immediately left him and went out on their own, touring the vaudeville circuits as Howard, Fine, and Howard. The new act, dubbed the Three Lost Souls, wowed audiences at every stop, but the Three Lost Souls could never lose the vindictive Healy. He desperately wanted them back and was willing to resort to any means, fair or foul, to get his way. So he sued them repeatedly, claiming that they had stolen his material from him. He lost those court cases, but that didn't stop him. He even threatened to blow up the theater in which the boys were performing. The easily frightened Shemp was at this point so terrified of his former boss that he wanted to quit the popular new act rather than rile up the volatile Healy any further. But instead, in 1932, a strange thing happened. My father, now the de facto manager of the team, decided to accept Healy's offers to return. Which raises the question, why? Why, after all the man's despicable behavior and after all their success without him, why did Dad go back? Perhaps he, like Shemp, actually feared the hot-tempered Healy. Maybe he still put faith in a childhood friendship. Or could it have been that he had simply grown tired of the endless harassment? Or to engage a bit of amateur psychiatry, perhaps Moe, having been raised by a strong, controlling mother, was conditioned to acquiesce to an overbearing authority figure, a role Ted Healy was more than happy to fill. Whatever the real reason, my father always said that returning to Healy was simply a sound business move. If there was more to it than that, we'll never know.
Ladies and gentlemen, Ted Healy is next. I thank you. This is Ted Healy. Whew. This is Ted Healy. Whew. Back to the rat trap.
So Healy had once again found his 3 lost souls. But after booking the act into a new Broadway review, the always slippery Ted was back to his old tricks, voiding his contract to accept the more lucrative offer from vaudeville. Moe and Larry decided to follow their deal-breaking boss, even though he was set to make $6,000 a week. They only $100. But Shemp had finally had enough, and he left the act.
Shemp left the act because he was really afraid of Ted Healy. Ted, when he was drinking, could be very, well, mean. He never hurt anybody, but he was rather a frightening image. And then Shemp being a little bit of a fraidy cat, it just took boo, and he'd run the other way.
Who would replace Shemp?
Now that's funny.
After trying out, and I'm not kidding about this, a comic xylophone player named Fred Sanborn, my father realized that the best replacement for one brother would be another.
Now you're talking.
And so he called Babe. And just what had the youngest Howard son been doing in the 10 years since my grandmother had forbidden him from joining Moe and Shemp on the vaudeville circuit? Essentially living under her thumb, growing older, if not exactly growing up. Jenny pampered him at every turn, buying him fancy clothes, allowing him to enjoy himself at nightclubs and at the beach. Babe became quite a ladies' man, and it was this that led to his final emancipation. In 1929, he secretly married and soon approached my grandmother for financial help. Instead of indulging her son once more, Jenny reacted like a woman scorned. She insisted that the marriage be ended and pulled the strings to have it annulled.
Darling, I've got to go.
Remember,
You've got to go.
this was a 26-year-old adult,
Yes, I've got to go.
not a lovesick teenager.
Well, if you've got to go, you've got to go.
It was the event that finally convinced Babe that he could no longer be the baby, and that he finally had to become his own man. And being his own man meant being in show business, in spite of his mother's objections.
Am I a tyrant just because I know what's best for my boys? You call it smothering, I call it mothering. America, hey, it's a free country.
You don't know who you are till you find out who you are. You know, you don't know what your strengths are until you need them. And maybe Curly was he was a ladies' man, you know? He was a ladies' man, liked to party, liked to dance.
Now, in 1932, when Moe's offer came, Babe had very little show business experience. His big credit was as the comic conductor of the Orville Knapp Band, a role that forced him to play the fool in a tearaway tuxedo.
He would direct the band with flourishes, and never his sleeve would fall out, and his coat would split up the back, and he finally finished the number. He was in his underwear.
As you can imagine, the chance to join the Stooges was like a lifeline to a drowning man, and Babe grabbed it, even shaving his head of thick, wavy hair and his wax mustache at Healy's insistence. The boss wanted him to look silly, and with his newly shorn noggin, it seemed only fitting to bill him as...
Hello, Moe. Hello, Curly. Wait a second. Wait a minute. What's his name? That's Curly. That's Curly. I thought you said Girly. I wasn't sure.
Though it has been said that, like Samson, Curly never really emotionally adjusted to his unkindest cut of all.
Promise me it won't hurt.
It's not gonna hurt. Is it gonna hurt?
Might hurt a little bit.
It's not.
It won't hurt. It won't hurt.
Sit down.
Maybe the fact he had to shave his head, he had to prove something. He loved women, and most of the times you see him in a social setting, he's got a hat on, trying to cover up his shaven head.
We've all read these stories about how he came to resent the idea of shaving his head and felt that it, made him less attractive and that it interfered with his personal life, with his private life. How much so and to what degree, I don't know. I don't know.
Hello, Governor. There it is, kid. Read it. I ain't got nothing to do with it. I wouldn't hit you.
Verily, I repeat, I will not give you the money.
I don't care. Verily and over here. Pay me the $50,000 and I'll foreclose the mortgage, you rat. Hello, how are you, Governor? Hello, Governor.
Pay him the $50,000! What's the matter? What's the matter?
The act, as popular with Curly as it was with Shemp, was in demand on vaudeville and nightclub circuits. And in 1933, Hollywood came a-courtin' again, this time in the form of a scout from the prestigious MGM, this time with an offer to appear in a series of films. And this time, like every other time, Healy signed the contract for all of them.
We went to MGM for a year, in 1933. And we made 5 two-reel comedies and 5 feature-length pictures. Made a feature-length for Dancing Lady with Joan Crawford and Clark Gable. And Fugitive Lovers with Robert Montgomery and Madge Evans. Meet the Baron with Jimmy Durante and Jack Pearl. Wow. And made one with Lee Tracy called Turn Back the Clock.
Why can't we get in one of those New York shows?
We will as soon as they hear me sing.
And one called Hollywood Party, which was an all-star picture.
This feature teamed Healy and his sidekicks with Laurel and Hardy.
Look, this proves my point. A perfect specimen of the Neanderthal man. What, that?
Oh, no. Look at the measurements. Look at that. Look at it. What? That's the androgynous type.
I can prove it. The androgynous cranium is always hollow. Now, just listen.
No, Professor, you're wrong. That is the skull of the Anthropida.
No, that's more like the Anthropedia. Now, listen. Ah, the obvious Neanderthal type. Now just note the difference. Neanderthal, Anthropedia, androgynous. Oh, there you are.
Hey, fellas. See any prominent people? There's a lot of prominent people here.
Yeah, Neanderthal.
Who? Androphobia. What?
Androgynes.
What, are you kidding? Hold it. Okay. And this Indian started down a narrow pathway, and he bumped into another wild Indian.
That makes 2 Indians.
Yes, 2 Indians. That's for nothing, son. And these
2 of the comedies were in color.
In the mid-30s.
Yes, sir.
Boy, those must have been important movies then.
Yes, they were.
Hey, is that 3 Indians? Yes, 3 Indians. They started out very rich.
They had a few big musicals MGM had, and they were too long, so they cut 2 musicals out. And we wrote a short around one musical, a telemusical, and added some stuff to it and had a short out of it. So we did 2 of them like that.
She absolutely, positively don't mean nothing else but the story of the lady in the
What's so interesting in watching them with Ted Healy, coming to those shorts after knowing their work as a trio, as a solo act, if you will, is that now Ted Healy is sort of in the position that Moe usually takes. Ted Healy is the boss, and he's the straight man, and he's the one delivering the slaps.
Hang up. Are you gonna work?
No!
Are you gonna work?
No!
Are you gonna work?
I'll work if I feel like it.
Do you feel like it?
Yeah, I feel like it.
Now listen, fellas, let's get organized.
They hadn't really developed the roles of Larry, Moe, and Curly.
Hey, you mugs.
Moe more as a leader and Curly more in the antics of Curly. That came a little later.
What's the matter?
We're gonna have an audition.
A audition?
No, an audition. You heard me.
Well, I enjoy seeing those MGM films they're in. The Stooges are sort of left to be the funny guys.
Oh, we give you a bird and you can tell us where it comes from. Yeah, but give me a good one.
Moe gets to be a little wackier and a little funnier when he's working with Healy because he doesn't have to take on the mantle of boss. And it's very interesting to watch that and to see them a little looser and a little crazier, in a sense, under his umbrella.
And the studio employed them as well at live events, providing the comedy relief at premieres and parties.
When you watch how they are with Ted Healy, and he's the least funny, he's the most awkward, it's like no one could direct him to stay out of the way of something magical that was happening because his ego wouldn't let him do it. You know, he was one of those blowhards that said, hey, I got a big mouth and I got the gift of gab, you know, and people seem to like me, so all I got to do is be on stage, until he brought those guys with him, and those guys made him look like a fried egg on stage. You know, he just seemed to be in the way. And he never had anything funny to say. He would just go, no, wait a minute, you know, relax, fellas, you know. He never was in on any kind of, unless it was real shtick, like, you know, hey, where are you going to eat? I'm going to eat up the street, you know. Oh, don't be ridiculous. People don't eat up streets anymore.
What's that?
He's a hunter.
But what's the key for?
He's a house hunter.
Oh.
That was a tough road to hoe, to have somebody, knowing that you're that good and you don't make mistakes and you're so beautifully choreographed.
Hi, Chief. And don't talk back to the head waiter. You hear me, don't you, son? Don't talk back to the head waiter. And
they were masters at it, but Ted Healy would really hit him and stuff. He'd get carried away and he'd have a few pops before he'd go on stage.
How do you make an audience laugh?
I mean, how the boys and myself make an audience laugh?
Yes.
Well, it's a very simple thing. You do this, see? That. Now, if they don't laugh, that you do this. And this. That's some way. There's lots of ways, but that's one of them. Yes.
But how do you make them laugh real loud? You know,
make the audience laugh real loud?
Yes.
Well, that's a very tedious thing. But we do it. We got a little odd thing like this.
We got nothing to lose. Come on.
And though the boys were now ensconced, as they say, in the Hollywood scene, my dad and Uncle Curly still found time to visit the old homestead in Brooklyn. And on occasion, they took my grandparents back with them to California for a look at how the other half lives. The suns had risen all right, this time in the West. The long-standing pecking order had changed, and one can only imagine what the domineering Jenny thought of her boys' newfound freedom and fame.
Okay, so now they're big shots, big movie stars, big machers, but I'm still their mother. And they better remember who changed their diapers.
But in spite of all their success, Moe, Larry, and Curly never really felt completely comfortable at MGM. Famed for its glamorous personalities and glitzy productions, the studio never seemed a good match for these common man comedians and never really used them to best advantage. And then there were the ongoing problems with Mr. Healy. My father had made it a condition that their renewed partnership that the liquor-loving Ted give up the bottle. And while he may have cut it back, he never really cut it out. And Healy was still controlling the act and the purse strings, paying them as poorly as ever, if he bothered to pay them at all.
I think we're entitled to a piece of this show. But do we want it? Well, I got a few ideas on that subject. Now, all those in favor of electing me spokesman, say aye.
Aye.
That's unanimous.
Say I'm the boss, ain't I?
Yeah.
Recede, will you? Recede. I'll do all the talking. When I go up in that room, don't worry about me. I'll give them out plenty of conversation.
When you're an act, and you are the Stooges with a small s of a starring comedian like Ted Healy, who was a headliner in vaudeville and a headliner on Broadway, and you're part of his act, and you know that you're providing a lot of the laughs and giving him a lot of the elements of his success, and you don't feel you're getting a fair deal monetarily, that's got to be really tough.
You're under contract to me.
Maybe it's time for us to, maybe better off if we just...
Material's mine, Moe, and so are you. You welch on me now, I'll see to it you never work again, you hear me?
I'm sure it was very difficult to navigate that, especially with someone who could be stubborn.
Stop! You fool! Are you trying to kill this man? Why don't you mind your own business?
Shut up. I'll do the talking. I'm the boss, ain't I?
Well, you're not getting any place. You better try a little chiseling. Oh, he's great at chiseling.
You know what's coming to you, don't
The Stooges felt not only ill-paid, but ill-used, forever trapped as comic foils to a devious and domineering drunk. Still, as anyone can tell you, breaking up is hard to do.
How do you decide what you're going to do? Are you going to go on strike? You're going to not show up for work tomorrow, and that'll show him, let him go out there by himself and see if he still gets the laughs? Or do you feel dependent? Is he your gravy train? You don't necessarily want to cut loose from somebody who's a headliner and who gets steady work. That had to be very, very difficult, and I'm sure making the decision about the ultimate break must have been particularly difficult. How do you know you're going to succeed on your own?
Eventually, even the steadfast, loyal Moe agreed that the time had come to part ways with his longtime crony. On March 6, 1934, the four severed the partnership for good. Moe, Larry, and Curly were finally free. Freedom is good, but unemployment was bad. So the Stooges went in search of a new deal.
And the Stooges were offered a contract. Actually, were offered two contracts on almost the same time.
Soon, Larry had secured a contract offer with Universal Studios. And at almost the same moment, my father had put his signature to one from Columbia Pictures. A court decided that Moe's agreement preceded Larry's by several hours, and the Stooges were bound to Columbia. Those few hours would, for the Stooges, shape the course of the next 23 years.
And ended up signing with Columbia Films and doing a complete break with Healy, which infuriated Healy no end, because I think he realized that they were a big part of Ted Healy's success. What Healy tried to do was get three other performers, Garner, Wolfe, and Hakens, to become his new Three Stooges. And it worked a little bit for Healy. Worked out, of course, much better for the Three Stooges.
And so the Stooges landed at Little Columbia Pictures, which, in those days, was unfortunately the poor man's idea of a Hollywood dream factory. Sure, there were the occasional high-profile productions, but usually cranking out B pictures on C budgets, the studio was always underfinanced and often underappreciated. And compared to its star-studded siblings like MGM, RKO, and Warner Brothers, chronically cash-starved Columbia was most definitely a seat-of-the-pants operation. And the man who wore those pants, company chief Harry Cohn, was tailor-made to fit the popular image of the crass movie Kingpin, hard as nails and with the personality of a ball-peen hammer. Cohn ultimately became one of the most successful and one of the most hated of all the Hollywood bigwigs. He made enemies as easily as he made money, and inspired fear, loathing, and yet a strange kind of loyalty from his employees.
Harry Cohn had set up this short subjects department to turn out these economical and profitable comedy films.
If you got 4 days to make a short, man, you know you got to get it out there. And people like Harry Cohn, who I think had no respect for any acts, anybody that he was dealing with, because he couldn't do it.
I think lean on the bombs. Tell him not to worry about good. Just make it fast.
We'll pay you $1,000 for your first film, $1,250 for another 4, and $1,500 for 2 more after that. If we decide you're Columbia material, that sound okay to you?
You have yes, sir. Whatever you say.
Good. Get over to the shorts department. They'll put you to work right away.
He couldn't do what they did. Nobody laughed when Harry came in unless he tripped. He wasn't a nice guy to any of his artists.
My dad had his own view of this much maligned mogul. He was quoted as saying that Cohn was a real Jekyll and Hyde type. Socially, he could be very charming. Shades of Ted Healy. Cohn had founded the firm in New York as the CBC Film Sales Company, and when he moved to Los Angeles around 1920, he located his fledgling operation in a rundown section off Sunset Boulevard, the home of second-rate and fly-by-night studios. It was an area that would be derisively dubbed Poverty Row. And after hearing the low-budget CBC constantly referred to as corned beef and cabbage, Cohn changed the name to Columbia, a word he reportedly could not even spell at first. But for all his educational shortcomings, Harry Cohn knew how to make pictures fast and cheap and turn a small but dependable profit. He was one of the many American Jews attracted by the gold rush of opportunity provided by a new industry, one that was open to men who had been excluded from so many others because of their religion.
There was like a hate that was terrible. On Delancey Street, hire Schwartz. No, it's Smith now. Because Schwartz ain't working, there was a lot of underground anti-this and anti-that.
Growing out of vaudeville and melodramas, this burgeoning business would become, for those relocated East Coast Jewish Americans, an entertainment empire that was the envy of the world. And Harry Cohn was one of its most ambitious emperors. Actually, there were many striking similarities between my father and his new boss. They had been born 6 years apart in New York City to an immigrant Jewish family. Like Moe, Cohn had a successful mother and an ineffectual father, and both had dropped out of school before the age of 15. And there was something else that formed a parallel between them. One of CBC's earliest efforts had been a series of silent shorts depicting the misadventures of the Hall Room Boys, a pair of hobos who wreak havoc on high society. Cohn, as a denizen of Poverty Row, as a man driven by his resentment of the more glamorous rivals, no doubt took pleasure in the idea of these two clowns, as common as dirt, delivering a haymaker to the chin of aristocratic arrogance.
MGM was so rich, they did everything in a large manner, you know, where Columbia chose to save every nickel. You know, God help the guy that Harry Cohn caught lagging back on the job. Because he had a filthy mouth and a worse mind. And nobody seemed to like him, but we got along wonderful with him. He liked us.
It was an attitude that made him the perfect producer for the Stooges' brand of humor, the perfect partner to present Moe's undoing of dignity to the world.
Columbia was a good home for them. It was the right home for them, I think, because they were working with like-minded colleagues. They were working in the right atmosphere with the people who knew how to show them off at their best.
The Three Stooges to see Mr. Cohn. Go ahead.
They could have tried to go to RKO, which also made comedies, or to one of the other studios, but the Columbia setup was just right. Unfortunately, it wasn't lucrative for them.
And though Moe, Larry, and Curly had traded the abusive, abrasive Ted Healy for the abusive, abrasive Harry Cohn, it was a relationship that would result in great success over the next 2 decades. And so this was the Columbia. and the Cohn that the Stooges found in 1934. Ironically, it was that same year that the studio finally achieved legitimacy by releasing the film that would shockingly sweep the Oscars, the hit Frank Capra comedy, It Happened One Night. Columbia had made the big time at last. The Stooges would not be far behind.
Hi, everybody. Hi.
Oh, hi.
We're the Three Stooges and Company.
Farewell, my lovely... What's your name?
Tilda?
Tilda. This I like. And I get paid for it, too.
Yes, the big time. Though the big time could very well have been the one time. Always aware of the bottom line, Harry Cohn had insisted upon inserting a 60-day waiting period into the contract, just in case he didn't like the first Stooge shorts. Not, as it turned out, that he had any reason to worry. Now, it is true that their initial Columbia outing, Woman Haters, is an oddball little film, even by Stooges standards.
In the name of the Woman Haters Club, I welcome you. Do you three gentlemen understand what you're expected to do?
Drawing on vaudeville more than virtuoso violence, this ingenious miniature comic opera, told in rhyme and music, is not what any typical Stooge fan would consider as typical Three Stooges, although it is typically entertaining.
Tell me, is it really serious?
You'll never know how serious.
Let me help her. She's delirious. Look. She's gonna faint.
Oh, no, she ain't.
Oh, I can't bear it. I can't go on. Won't someone help me to my room, or I'll go right to my doom.
Well, little girl, if that's the case, I'll go with you almost any place.
Oh, thank you.
The Stooges, however, were on more familiar ground with the release of their second short, Punch Drunks, a frenetic farce that unleashed the boys in all their manic glory. The Stooges had found their own special style, and it was promising to be a knockout.
Say, you're a born champ.
Did I do that?
Sure. What's eating you? Don't you remember?
No. Every time I hear that weasel tune, something pops inside of me.
With Punch Drunks, the classic sight and sound of the Three Stooges had arrived, and they began to work their magic on movie patrons from coast to coast. But it was their third two-reeler, Men in Black, that was to cement the future. A spoof of the film Men in White, featuring their old MGM co-star Clark Gable, this madcap parody of the medical profession was nominated for an Academy Award, the only Stooge short ever to be so honored.
What's your name?
Anaconda.
Anaconda what?
No, just Anaconda.
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 Anaconda, 95 and an 8.
Anaconda, 95 and an 8.
That's awfully low, Doctor.
Yeah, we ought to sell. Sell 100 Anaconda, 95 and an 8.
100 Anaconda sold.
According to the producer Jules White, it was this accolade, along with rising box office receipts, that convinced Columbia to keep the trio working on celluloid.
How'd you find that patient in 66?
Under the bed.
How'd you find the patient in 72?
Up on a chandelier.
What'd you do for him?
Nothing. What'd you ever do for us?
What are you working here for?
On duty and humanity. Success. Success.
Where are the tools?
The tools? Tools?
This was also the film that presented what is probably the single most memorable blast of dialogue in the entire Stooge canon.
Dr. Howard, Dr. Fine. Dr. Howard, are you coming? Calling Dr. Howard, Dr. Fine, Dr. Howard.
Get it.
Calling Dr. Howard, Dr. Fine, Dr. Howard. Calling Dr. Howard, Dr. Fine, Dr. Howard.
Now, my dad, Larry, and my Uncle Curly were beginning to truly endear themselves to audiences with their combination of comic chaos and relentless resiliency, especially in the face of endless unemployment, a common theme in so many of their early films.
The Stooges were always outsiders. They were always impoverished, or seemingly impoverished. They were always looking for jobs. They were always the have-nots. And contrasting that against high society and the well-to-do or bureaucracy in any form was a perfect setup. And audiences of that time were primed to enjoy that.
Enjoy it they did, and laughed at it, and responded to it. Even if their own off-screen economic situations were, unlike those of the on-screen Stooges, too sad to be funny.
Pardon me, stranger. I'm a musician.
So what?
Well, I thought if you had some music around the place, you might increase business.
How much dough do you generally get?
Well, I get $250, but for you, I'll take $200.
I'll give you a bowl of soup.
I'll take it.
If you're good.
I hope the soup's good.
Say, I'm from the newspapers. Would you mind posing for a photograph?
Why, sure.
Thanks.
The Stooges' seemingly never-ending quest to find a job,
Fine. Now raise your right leg.
along with their stupendously stupid strategies for going about it,
Don't move now.
not only made viewers howl with laughter, but touched them in a very personal way.
Stick 'em up. I haven't got a dime. It's a depression with me. You talking depression and me with a gun here without bullets?
After all, everybody was in the same boat, and that boat was sinking fast into the depths of the Great Depression. There was, however, an ironic twist, because while most Americans were being laid low by the hard knocks of economic hardship, the Stooges were rising to dizzying new heights. Yes, the golden age of Stoogedom had arrived.
Did you call? You see that?